The subject matter of my lesson plan is specifically on substantive clauses. Students will be identify, recognize, and translate correctly substantive clauses in their native language as well as their target language. The lesson plan features the use of wiki technology, so students will be able to use a wiki and understand how to use one. And one of the other skills I'm trying to leave my students with are translation skills in terms of sight reading and translation, which will bring them to the next proficiency in the language. My target audience is ideal. It's third level Latin students. These are students taking the class beyond a requirement, so they're highly able and highly motivated. They're comfortable using technology, and it's a small class size, so it's suited for a comparative literature theme and class discussion. Students are assessed in several ways throughout this lesson plan. There's formative and summative assessments. The formative assessments include the various activities in the lesson plan. Because these activities are scaffolded, it's really important that the teacher is consistently monitoring the students' progress, assisting them, answering questions, and correcting mistakes along the way. The formative assessments are the wiki page discussion. Students will be correcting other students' work on a wiki page like the teacher would. The Latin composition defense, students will be composing a sentence in Latin and defending why they use the substantive clause in that way to the class. And the Latin translation, where students will be translating a speech in English to Latin. And then the summative assessment would be a translation test that I would administer perhaps regularly throughout the class, and the materials for the translation test would come specifically from classroom discussion, specifically from the wiki board, and specifically from the homework that the students are assigned. For this lesson plan, I designed specific language learning objectives. Basically that the students are able to find and identify substantive clauses, produce adequate translations of substantive clauses, and be able to compose sentences in the target language using these clauses. But then I also designed larger language learning goals for the lesson plan, which include increasing their translation skills to prepare them for college level proficiency in language, sight reading, translation, that the students are engaged in active learning throughout the lesson, that there's a continuity in their learning throughout multiple lesson plans if there were others that were to be designed, that they engage in critical thinking as well as self-reflection, that they make real-world connections, and that they understand content at their personal skill level through differentiated instruction. It's also important to think about the learning needs of the students. So in order to succeed at the next proficiency level in the language, students need critical thinking and observational skills. They need to be able to use all the learning language modes. And also we want to reduce their language learning anxiety so that they can learn language through the direct method by context. There were several learning challenges that I think would be problematic in my lesson plan. Which is the speed of the class, because this is a technology-driven teaching experience. Teachers can really incorporate more activities and more teaching in the lesson, and sometimes that can be problematic to students, especially students that are struggling with the content. So I would encourage the teacher to pay attention to their learners and, when necessary, slow things down. The other issue is cooperative learning. With cooperative learning situations, the level of engagement can vary per student, as well as the level of learning, even if they're doing the same activity. So again, the student's going to have to pay attention to their learners and push certain students when necessary. And this is partly connected to language proficiency levels and differentiated instruction, which I feel the wiki really allows the teacher's successful way of doing. The technology featured in my lesson plan is the wiki page technology. I think these are particularly useful in foreign language classrooms, especially when the length of assignments make it impossible to cover all the assigned readings in class. Wikis are a great way to facilitate discussion and grammar learning outside of the classroom. It's editable by everybody in the class, and it keeps the units as one material rather than a series of strings like a blog or discussion board. And it can be used, the same wiki can be used for multiple assignments, which is great. You can also design specific activities for the wiki to further either grammar and syntax, if that's your point, or learn tangential information about culture or society. Using a wiki also requires students to interpret the work that they read on it to interact with other students in the class and/or the teacher and present the information back to other learners. My lesson plan begins with the teacher putting a quote on the board relevant to the comparative literature theme of eloquence in the target language. Students have to sight translate this quote in the beginning of class, and then they discuss in the native language the context and answer some meaningful questions. After they go over the quote, students go over the substantive clause review sheet that I designed for this lesson plan. Because they're advanced learners, this is just a review. We shouldn't have to spend much time on it. After we go over a few of these examples aloud, then the actual wiki use begins. Students work in pairs to answer the assigned questions on the wiki and translate the sentences. After they do this successfully, the teacher walks around the class answering questions, making sure this is going smoothly. They then have to comment on other groups' answers and correct their answers or ask questions to push their thoughts further. Having read the entire classroom discussion on the wiki about the clauses and how other students have used them, now students will work in groups to come up with an alternative way of expressing the sentence they've translated in the native language. Students will then present their writings and findings on the wiki, with one student in the pair defending the original sentence in the way it was written, and the other defending the new way that they've written it, answering the questions: why did the author choose to write the sentence the way they did, and what did their choices give to the meaning? The class ends with students watching a clip from HBO's series Rome to demonstrate the way in which ancient oration took place, the costumes, and the gestures. In class, the teacher will discuss with the students what is lost in modern communication via technology. For homework, students will be given the same paragraph from a modern-day political speech, like Obama's acceptance speech, and they will consider the meaning of each of the clauses in the paragraph of the speech and discuss the nuances of them in their native language. In the future, students will be prepared to translate these clauses and the paragraph into Latin, and will post these as well on the wiki and could perhaps even perform them. The design rationale behind my lesson plan was that high school advanced Latin classes might be better taught with a comparative literature theme or a schematic theme organizing the grammatical content that the teachers are teaching. So I created a theme called Eloquentia defined for my lesson plan, so students will learn about Latin and grammar and authentic texts, as well as about eloquence in the ancient and modern world. This class was meant to prepare students for a college experience in this language and its proficiency. The next level would be translation and sight reading. I wanted to emphasize real-world connections, so I designed a few activities that draw correlations from ancient and modern oration. I also want to improve their grammar and composition skills in their native language, as well as have this class serve as a bridge between their beginner/intermediate language learning and advanced language learning, beyond reading Latin to truly understanding it. For a Latin class and put some samples on it of what we can expect to see. We can expect to see students correcting students. We can also expect to see several students commenting after students correct one another and engage in discussion. We can also expect to see examples of tangential learning, students talking about other things on the website, as well as students learning from each other through differentiated instruction. Here you can see a student engaging in a lengthy discussion to which another student responds, "I don't understand." And you can also see examples of students discussing with each other outside of class as well on the wiki. Here are a few images of the wiki page I made for this lesson plan. Again, now that you've seen some actual examples of a real wiki, I just want to emphasize the benefits, which include extra practice, critical thinking, active learning, shared discussion, use of technology, and it's a tool that you can incorporate it in the classroom time or leave outside. Here I include some of the resources I found helpful in doing this project, including a couple different articles as well as websites on using wiki in the classroom.